As usual, today's Wednesday, June 4th, 2025, and they're using what sounds like a reasonable argument to stall building new pipelines. Canadians have had enough. We want things to actually start functioning properly again, and unfortunately, that's not happening. And so we were promised change and we were promised investment and all this stuff. And Carney said he's going to do it, and he hasn't done it. And all he's done is actually delayed by another 2 years. And I think that that is notable. Unless we get shovels in the ground, we're not building pipelines. If we're allowing them to do more studies and more studies and more studies and apply new standards to these things, we are being screwed. We are not building pipelines. And we should address that. We should be honest with ourselves and with our government about what we think about their ideas and their execution because, well, they work for us. Alberta gets a 2025 referendum, October with the municipality running it, or whatever. It's going to be on a municipal something or other. I've got the story later. Why is the government running it? You should do it independently, because otherwise they're going to say, oh, well, something, and we just can't do this, Alberta, not right now. You're not going to be allowed to if you allow the government to run this for you. Unfortunately, I strongly believe this. I hope I'm wrong about that, because it looks like the government's going to run it for you. But also, if the government doesn't do it, the citizens will. Like, if the government just drags their feet and just kind of keeps kicking the can down the road, eventually the citizens will get wise and do it themselves. And then the government will say, oh, no, we meant to do it. We were going to do it. We said we were going to do it. So they're just getting ahead of something like that. They don't want you doing it, because if you do it, you're taking control, and they want to keep control. Because if you have a whole big referendum, well, it really matters who counts the votes, right? Like, it doesn't matter so much who you get to vote or mobilize or anything like that. It matters who counts the votes. So have your citizens and the people who are running this whole thing count the votes. You know what I'm saying? So there's that. The wildfires are human caused, according to the Manitoba government. I've got the report. I've got a whole bunch of people talking about it. Arson. It's arson season again, folks. And I have even a new MP talking about wildfire season. I think that's a misnomer, maybe even misinformation or disinformation, whichever one is the bad one, malinformation. But he's saying wildfire when really it's arson season. And we should be honest. Again, if we don't deal in what we're actually experiencing and is happening, then we're just in a fantasy world. RFK is shilling for the mRNA platform. He says, don't worry, we've got a real placebo trial on this one. And it isn't. The placebo is the first vaccine, as far as I understand it. Jason Kenney, the globalist, attacks Maxime Bernier about his immigration platform, and that's interesting. Planetaire, I'm saying it wrong, Planetaire is a data collection nightmare that just got put in charge by Trump, so we'll explore that, man. That looks not so good. Iron Dome, AI, Planetaire, control of the internet. Well, this is turning into more and more of a nightmare, right? But I don't think Kamala Harris would have been better. So eventually, this is all going to collapse under its own weight. It can't survive long. And by long, I mean, it can't survive more than 50 years. Can it? Maybe. 5-hour wait in the emergency room, and that's the longest wait in the country. I don't think so, but that's what they're saying. And they're saying poor Quebec with the longest wait in the country. And so people are chiming in on how long it actually takes in their province to get a doctor or see a doctor. And it's a lot longer than 5 hours. So lots to get to. Let's get to it. First, I've got a quick meme for you here. And this is an American meme, but I think it applies to Canada too. How does a country trillions of dollars in debt keep giving billions of dollars in financial aid to Ukraine or other countries, Israel or Gaza or Palestine or anywhere really, all of the other places that aren't Canada? Why are we giving any money to them? Is there a good reason to maintain that ongoing agreement? If not, we should end it, and we should end it like today. Yesterday would be good. And if not yesterday, then today is the best time to start. So I think we're being screwed on pipelines. I think that we are being led down the garden path. I think we're being told a story that is plausible, and politicians are really good at letting you fill in the blanks, letting you assume the things that they're not saying, right? And so we're going to be an energy superpower. So you assume we're going to build a whole bunch of pipelines. And if we don't build a bunch of pipelines, then you question the whole narrative, right? The whole thing maybe is thrown out the water. Carney's inner circle of appointees, his wife, his advisors, principal secretary, everybody are pretty well anti-pipeline. And we're being sold this lie of, 2 more years and we'll get new pipelines built in that timeline within a new framework and all this other stuff. And new frameworks take time to stand up. Here's CBC Watcher, and he's saying, this is a quote from this National Post article. Carney's inner circle contains more than a few figures who have been quite vocal about their distaste for oil and gas development, sometimes as little as a few months ago. And I've got video of his wife, and here's his wife interviewing his new principal secretary, Marc-Andre Blanchard. And in this interview right here, Blanchard says, what's the direct quote? That they're going to exclude investment in new oil pipelines. And Andy Lee ties some things together with Brookfield, although I don't know how firm those connections are, although they seem pretty reasonably firm, but it seems, quite brazen, to enrich your old company, Brookfield, and at the expense of the country you're supposed to be the prime minister of. It's kind of crazy. So here's Marc-Andre Blanchard interviewing with Diana Carney, who's Mark Carney's wife, and they're talking about zeroing out the investment into new pipelines. Here we go, unless it's Brookfield.
And we'll continue to, to exclude investments in new oil pipelines. And for us, it's clear we want to avoid contributing to the growth of the global oil supply, but we want to really remain open to investments in transition platforms and projects. And there's a big role for capital in this.
So they don't want to add any more oil, but they want transition capital flowing. Very interesting. National Post says Carney said he'd consider fast-tracking a new oil pipeline to the West Coast if it shipped decarbonized barrels. Decarbonized barrels? What are decarbonized barrels? I have absolutely no idea. Here's Mark Carney talking about decarbonized barrels. Mark Petrone says decarbonizing our oil, so let's make it more expensive to produce and ship than every other oil producing nation, so it's as unprofitable as possible. Sounds like Brookfield doesn't want to compete against Canadian energy since its oil and gas investments are outside Canada. Here's Mark Carney talking about decarbonized oil. National Post had an article about this, but it doesn't explain what decarbonized oil is, and it was behind a paywall. And it's one of those things where I thought maybe the news article would shed some light on this, but it didn't. Here's Mark Carney.
The interest is in, as mentioned in the press release, decarbonized barrels. So working alongside forms of decarbonization for those barrels. That is absolutely in our interest. It provides diversification of trade partners. It provides the development of new industries. It provides economic activity across the West and into the North. So yes, there's real potential there. We took up a good deal of our time in discussions and potential to move forward on that. And if further developed, the federal government will look to advance it.
I wonder if any of the discussion was, what do you mean by decarbonized oil, sir? Mark Nixon says Danielle Smith knows the path to Canada's prosperity. Ottawa needs to get out of the way. So, I think that was queued up. We'll leave it. We'll put it right around 43, I think it was.
You look at that along with Energy East, along with Keystone XL, it just magnifies it. We could have by now had 2.5 million barrels per day more of production. That's $55 billion worth of GDP value. And the split, again, we benefit at the provincial level almost as much as the federal government does. So when the federal government is able to get those dollars, they're able to share them in the rest of the country. And that's part of the value proposition about why we want to see those projects built. It's
value proposition to bribe Canada to let us please enrich our natural resources and sell them to customers, because we can give you billions of dollars if you let us enrich these things that we have beneath our feet. It's super weird that Canada needs a $55 billion bribe, with a B, to actually move forward with this common sense thing. It doesn't make any sense at all. It would create jobs. It would create prosperity and wealth. It would create all sorts of stuff. Globalists hate everything like jobs and prosperity and wealth. I think jobs are a psyop. I think we've been sold something that is very damaging to our family unit, and jobs are part of that sale. Anyway, I digress. Here's the rest of Danielle Smith's thing.
It's even getting more so as we start talking to each other about, well, if we need to build 42-inch pipe, where can we get that from? Who can produce it? Right
Hamilton?
now, I think there's only one place in Canada that can. So why don't we find a way to retool our factories so we can build more of the products that we need for those major projects in-house. And that's, I think, the really constructive conversation that's now happening across the country, is that if we have an American partner that doesn't want to buy our products anymore, how do we buy more from each other? And I think that that's going to be the other way that we have additional benefits. So maybe why you saw so much common cause.
Retooling the factories makes sense. One of the things I wanted to say as well about Danielle Smith talking about like the interprovincial stuff, I think that it's interesting that she's willing to say, listen, we will give you of $55 billion, we'll only keep $17 billion. That's the split. And, you know, that's part of the conversation. You guys distribute that other money that Alberta made for you wherever you want in the country. And like, is that what Albertans want? Do you think, is that what Albertans want? I think that every province is super rich. Every province is really, really rich. We've got softwood. We've got, in Ontario, we've got minerals. We've got oil in Alberta. We've got all sorts of stuff. We could really enrich each province and be very rich. The Maritimes have fishing. The Maritimes have all sorts of wealth in different ways. And like, have you ever played Civilization? Like, we could be super rich. I don't understand why we're sitting here trying to play communists, and while we're playing communists, diminish one of the best golden goose things of Alberta that we've got. And it doesn't make any sense. And has anybody mentioned anything about the canola yet? No. Here's Julius. He says, what nonsense is this? He's responding to Danielle Smith saying, I'm encouraged by the discussions I had this week with Prime Minister Carney and Canada's premiers at our first ministers meeting in Saskatoon. There's a clear commitment from the federal government and the provinces to expand critical infrastructure and ensure our natural resources, including oil and gas, can reach global markets, just decarbonized oil and gas, right? This commitment was reinforced through the signing of a joint communique, specifically affirming support for the development of a bitumen pipeline. Fingers crossed. The Prime Minister acknowledges that the federal government must address key policy barriers to support private industry and attract new investment in nation-building projects like this. That must include abandoning the unconstitutional oil and gas production cap, repealing the tanker ban, scrapping the net zero power regulations, and overhauling Bill C-69. Making Canada an energy superpower will take immediate action to reform Canada's regulatory environment. The federal government needs to take action now. And here is Julius. He says, what nonsense is this? A clear commitment from the federal government and the provinces to expand critical infrastructure and ensure our natural resources, including oil and gas, can reach global markets. You don't need a better behaved federal government. You need less federal government. Clip its fingers. You laid out 4 unconditional demands in your May 5th speech. Have you forgotten all of them? 1, a guaranteed corridor and port access to tidewater off the Pacific, Arctic, and Atlantic coasts for the export of oil, gas, critical minerals, and other resources in amounts supported by the free market rather than by the dictates of the whims of Ottawa. 2, the federal government must end all federal interference in the development of provincial resources by repealing the No New Pipelines Law, C-69, the oil tanker ban, the net zero electricity regulations, the oil and gas emissions cap, the net zero vehicle mandate, and any federal law or regulation that purports to regulate industrial carbon emissions, plastics, or the commercial free speech of energy companies. 3, federal government must refrain from imposing export taxes or restrictions on the export of Alberta resources without the consent of the government of Alberta. And finally, the federal government must provide Alberta the same per capita federal transfers and equalization payments as it receives by the other 3 largest provinces, Quebec, Ontario, and British Columbia. I don't see anything in the current statements about asserting provincial sovereignty, allowing free market forces to dictate productive volume, reducing federal authority to impose pipeline and tanker bans, ending predatory taxation, or ending or reforming equalization payments. I also don't see anything about Senate reform, though you shamefully neglected to include that in your May 5th speech. Wexit now. So, yeah, people I don't think are happy, and they don't want the deal that's being offered by Ottawa. You can keep your paltry $17 billion. You know, give us the lion's share. Why does Ottawa get more than half, right? Like, it's weird. $30 billion for letting Alberta develop their own resources? Huh. Super weird. Here's Andy Lee. She says they didn't just buy a pipeline. They bought the largest refined products pipeline by volume in the United States. Brookfield eyes $3 billion in debt for Colonial Pipeline. Brookfield agrees to buy Colonial Enterprises for $9 billion in April. And so they didn't just buy a pipeline. The key part here is who they bought it from. One of the owners of Colonial was CDPQ, run at the time by Mark Carney's new chief of staff, Marc-Andre Blanchard. And so here's Andy Lee, and she kind of ties it up. She says, just so everyone understands how this went, Mark and Diana Carney push for net zero. CDPQ promises to divest from oil in accordance with those goals. Mark Carney becomes prime minister. CDPQ sells pipeline to Brookfield. CDPQ becomes CDPQ head becomes Mark Carney's chief of staff. Questions? Right? So that's a pretty sweetheart deal. Very interesting. And they're not going to have any kind of competition from a oil producing nation like Canada, right? No competition whatsoever. Very interesting. Very interesting. Kelowna Now says Dave Eby says he won't be changing his mind on another BC pipeline, rebuffing Doug Ford. The premier says the province doesn't support lifting the ban on oil tankers off British Columbia's northern coast. So I'm shocked. I'm super shocked. Can you believe this? Here's what happens when you have carbon taxes that are just harmful to your own country. Here's on the left a Canadian cut of meat, just under a kilogram, 910 grams, I think, yeah, or 0.91 kilograms to be exact, and that's $50 at presumably, it says IGA, family pack T-bone. In the United States, 1.24 pounds, I don't know what that is in kilograms. I don't know what that is in kilograms, is $14.84. Hold on, I'm going to find out. So it'd be $30. So this cut of beef is about twice the size of this cut of beef. Okay. So this is 0.91 and this is 1.24 pounds. So 1 pound is 4.45 kilograms. So 2 pounds would be, so this is a 2 pound steak. Okay. And this is 1.25. So not quite, still a big difference. Not as big as the price indicates, but still a big difference. So it's about maybe $28, something like that. Crazy town, right? It's a pretty big difference. Big difference. $50 for that meat, right? Expensive. Let's talk about budgets. What budget? And so there was an amendment passed at the of the throne speech when there were not enough Liberals in the House to make sure that their majority was a voting majority. And so they screwed up. They had 164, and the Conservatives and the rest of the opposition got 166 to 164, and they passed an amendment. And the amendment says either a budget happens or a confidence vote happens. And so that'll be interesting to see if it's a confidence vote and if the Liberals survive it without producing a budget, or if they produce something and we have a confidence vote on that. Maybe we're going to a summer election, which Carney will win again in a strangely similar fashion, right? Like, oh man, I don't want to be right about that, but my gosh, I don't see Poilievre's going to win the next one? Okay, sure. Mark Nixon says, Mark Carney walked into Parliament. So after that vote happened, this is Mark Carney coming back, and he says, I'm going to take note of that vote from yesterday that you guys talked about. And then he talks about the things that Canadians really need to focus on. And then he gets schooled by a Conservative MP. Mark says, Mark Carney walked into Parliament thinking he'd impress Canadians. Instead, he got roasted. What kind of economic genius and banker doesn't think a budget is appropriate? Yeah, I mean, honestly, this is beyond the pale. Here we go. Here's Mark Carney getting roasted.
Take note of last night's motion. But what Canadians deserve, what Canadian provinces deserves, is a health care transfer. Is a transfer for child care. Is a transfer for dental care. Is a transfer to support affordability. Yep. That's what's in the main estimates, and we expect the support of members opposite.
The right honourable member for Edmonton West.
Mr. Speaker, I realize he's new here, but all those things would be in a budget if you table one.
Zing.
Mr. Speaker, this year alone, this government is going to spend a staggering $26 billion on high-priced, Liberal-friendly consultants, an eye-watering $1,400 for every Canadian family. They'll present no budget, no departmental plans, and zero transparency. They won't even stand in this House and tell Canadians what the deficit will be this year. Will the Liberals come clean, table the spring budget as this House has demanded?
The right honourable.
Nope. I don't think so. We'll see. We'll see. I'll be shocked if they table a budget. I'll be very surprised. CBC Watcher says, without action, small businesses filing their 2024 taxes in June are required to pay corporate income tax on their share of the $2.5 billion carbon rebate they've already received and spent. Then CRA is suggesting 600,000 small business owners file an amendment to get the tax back when the legislation changes made. This makes no sense at all. Among the best things the federal government could do is address the massive economic and trade uncertainty facing small businesses to provide them with certainty on these tax measures. they have all been promised, are ready to go, and should be part of a 2025 budget this legislative session. And so we'll see. There are real problems that need to be addressed with a budget. And if they're not addressed, then the budget that was previously submitted stands, and all of the trimmings that go along with it. And so people, if promises have been made, like these taxes are going to be repealed, or this thing, you're not going to have to pay it, and it's not been done in the budget, and the budget's not passed, then all of those things, those promises don't get enacted. All of those tax expectations stay expectations, and the small businesses get screwed again. So, I mean, there you go. It is what it is, right? It's very, very interesting. Rupa, let's talk about our grab bag of governance. And Rupa is talking about the border bill, C2, I think, which is its name. It is being introduced, and Mark Carney is touting it as, strengthening the border. And even Rupa's not looking into it very much. And she's saying, yes, strengthening the border. And I don't think so. She says, in some excellent news, Mark Carney's government has tabled a bill that would prohibit anyone who has been in Canada for more than a year from having a refugee claim heard, and gives the government the power to halt or cancel immigration applications en masse if it's in the public interest. So this is framing this bill as something that you might want your government to do. Rupa's not telling you this bill is dangerous. This bill has poison pills in it that you probably won't like. What kind of poison pills? Well, the RN Rant says, hi, Rupa, 2 questions. Would it be applied to those already in Canada prior to the bill being passed? And what about this Trojan horse? Peter says, I thought it was right here. It's not. Peter says, hidden inside the border security bill, Canada's central banker prime minister is going to further centralize banking. The bill would outlaw cash transactions greater than $10,000. Yikes, right? And there are other poison pills in there. Here's the link. I just didn't recognize the picture. Here's Canada Proud. This is not a border bill, they say. This is a massive power grab under the guise of a border bill. Don't be fooled. Carney's Liberals have just introduced Bill C2, the Strong Borders Act. The law allows the Carney government to seize and read your mail for up to 60 days without due process or compensation, and track your online data without a warrant. Yay, the Carney Liberal power grab has begun. Why didn't Rupa mention that? Right? Super weird that Rupa would just, not mention any of those very important aspects to the bill. Weird, right? Isn't that strange? The Globe and Mail is reporting on this, and it says border bill would give authorities sweeping security powers and restrict asylum claims. Even the Globe and Mail. So in a newspaper article, you're supposed to start with the most important stuff. You start with the really important stuff, and then as the news article goes on, fewer people read the news article to the end. So you put older information, non-important information at the end. Do you know what it's at the end of this article? I'll show you right now because I think it's important. It is, the bill would outlaw cash transactions greater than $10,000 to prevent money laundering. Banks and credit unions would still be able to take deposits in cash of over $10,000. So you're not allowed to outlaw transactions over $10,000. Crazy, right? So like if you go into the bank and say, I'd like $10,000 of my money. I have $100,000 in my bank account and I want to buy this car, cash money from my cousin right here. Give me my $10,000. They'd want you to do an electronic funds transfer because the electronic funds transfer is trackable and the cash money is not. That's why they want to track everybody to prevent money laundering. You're not allowed to use your money because money laundering, but the government launders our money through Ukraine. The government launders our money through wars, right? But we're not allowed to have $10,000 of our own money to spend as we wish because the government can't track it. Central bank digital currency and digital ID is on the horizon. Here's the article. We'll read through it because it does go through all of the things that the bill is proposing. The federal government has tabled a bill that would significantly limit who can pursue refugee claims in Canada while giving officials the power to cancel immigration applications en masse. The bill tabled Tuesday also includes wide-ranging border security measures aimed at reducing the flow of drugs and illicit goods out of Canada while giving security agencies fresh powers to collect information about electronic communications. It's one of the first pieces of legislation proposed by Prime Minister Carney's government and goes much further than changes sought by his predecessor. Trudeau's government clamped down on temporary residence and asylum claims in his final year in office as Ottawa was under pressure to address strained public services and the housing shortage. The bill reintroduces some proposed asylum changes blocked last year by opposition MPs. The proposed legislation is the latest federal announcement designed to beef up the border with the United States after complaints from Donald Trump that Canada has not done enough to stop illegal crossings and combat fentanyl smuggling, and now they're managing that. It says, even though border agency data suggests only a tiny fraction of the drugs in the U.S. come from Canada. Mr. Trump has used those claims to justify tariffs on Canadian goods. Mr. Carney promised during the spring election campaign to address unsustainable immigration levels, and last week's throne speech said the government would restore balance to the system. The bill was quickly criticized by refugee advocates, okay, Globe and Mail, who accused the government of targeting migrants and people fleeing persecution. Deport them all. Deport them. Under the bill, anyone who claims asylum after more than a year in Canada would not have their case considered by the Immigration and Refugee Board and would instead face deportation, but they would be offered a risk assessment first, so claimants wouldn't be removed to places deemed unsafe, including war zones such as Gaza or Ukraine. So what's the use, right? Like if they say, listen, I'm gay, and if you send me back to Iraq, I'm going to be persecuted. They're like, oh, well, I'm sorry that you committed these crimes in Canada. It must have been hard for you. Here you go, you get to stay. And like, that's genuinely what I think happens. Honestly, we're in such a crazy time. I've seen stuff like this in the United Kingdom. I showed you one yesterday where there was an imam who was preaching hate or something like that, and he got to stay in Canada because his mental health concerns were considered by the judge. Ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. So it's absolutely not something that is beneficial to us. It would also clamp down on those exploiting a provision in the Safe Third Country Agreement with the United States. Under the agreement, people must claim asylum in the first country they arrive in, meaning that most are sent back to the United States if they arrive at the Canadian border. But that rule does not apply to anyone who's been in Canada for 14 days. The bill would change the rules to require people to claim asylum within 14 days. After that, claimants would not receive a hearing, and instead they will be subject to deportation. Such claimants would also be entitled to a risk assessment by immigration refugees, so that's the loophole. Every person in there will be saying, I'm at risk of persecution. The bill would give the government the authority to immediately pause or cancel processing of immigration applications, including en masse, for example, if evidence of widespread fraud has emerged. Migrants' Rights Network spokesperson Syed Hassan expressed alarm at the changes, saying they would drastically restrict protections for refugees and immigrants. We're witnessing the deliberate expansion of a mass deportation machine designed to tear apart families and communities. Well, I was already sold on it. You don't have to convince me. No, I wasn't. I'm just kidding. But I don't think that Carney's going to actually do any of these things because loopholes are giant and you could walk right through them. In addition to the asylum changes, the bill also proposes new powers to border and law enforcement agencies. The bill would give police and intelligence services enhanced power to access electronic information, in some cases without a warrant granted by a court. It would boost the role of the Coast Guard by giving it the ability to conduct security patrols using helicopters and boats and to share its findings with security, defense, and intelligence agencies. The proposed law would give police more power to search the mail while expanding the authority of Canada Post to open people's letters. The bill would outlaw cash transactions greater than $10,000 to prevent money laundering, banks and credit unions, and would still be able to take deposits of cash over $10,000. Oh, there was more of the article. I thought that was right at the end, but there's more article here. So it wasn't buried quite at the end, but functionally close enough. The difference between 2024 and 2025, and this Pride person, I guess, is trying to threaten these companies by saying, we see you. And they inadvertently showed a list of companies that listened to their customers. Maybe their customers said, we don't want you kowtowing to the Rainbow Mafia or the Rainbow Communists, and we'd like you to stop. And so they did. So IBM, Apple, HP, which one's this? American Airlines, Paramount, and Vogue did not change their logos. Major League Baseball changed their logo, and there's pressure campaigns to force other people to change, like other big corporations to change their logo. But people are done with the rainbow communists, and that's good. That's good news, right? So it's interesting. I'm certainly seeing less of it, and there's a massive pushback, whereas before there was not much of a pushback. Massive pushback against what's going on. Here is this guy. I've never seen his videos before, but I think that he's probably well known. He's talking about what's happened since Mark Carney was elected, and he's citing Blanchette as saying, like, I don't understand the culture. And he's like, yeah, me either. I don't get it either. But it's quite good. So we'll listen to a minute of it. Here we go.
I still have problems understanding.
It's been one day since an incident of too fast talking. Apologies. I thought I had this all set up.
That.
I have problems understanding everything in this country. This is my first video since the election because I don't know how to articulate what the fuck is going on with this country anymore. And I'm afraid to ask questions. Like Mark Carney, they tell me he's the obvious choice to lead us through this economic crisis because he has a PhD in economics. But if that's the criteria, what was it about the resume of a drama teacher with a learning disability that made him uniquely obvious to be the guy to lead us for the last 10 years of economic crisis and a housing crisis and a climate crisis and an opioid crisis and a pandemic? And the country's reaction to the pandemic. Like, medical mistakes take almost as many Canadian lives every year as COVID did at the height of the pandemic. And no one is scared of doctors. In fact, so many people can't wait to catch their doctor that we don't have enough doctors. And suicide by government, that causes more deaths than COVID and influenza combined. And yet we demand you be vaccinated against COVID in order to protect lives. But want to expand the law to allow the government to kill more people. And we're so pious in Canada that we'll...
Holding both of those truths at the same time, right? The one side, expand MAID law, other side, we have to protect lives. For your safety, comrade, take the jab. That is cognitive dissonance embodied. You are being told both things are true at the same time, and you have to act on them. And they are in conflict, causing cognitive dissonance in you. And that's the point. The government wants to keep you off balance, right? And isn't that weird? That's a weird thing for the government to want to do, right? Kevin says, under Prime Minister Trudeau's watch, the Liberal government turned a blind eye to at least 70 Catholic churches burned or vandalized or otherwise desecrated. Churches of other denominations were also randomly attacked. The RCMP reported a 260% spike in anti-Catholic hate. Mark Carney has spoken about his Catholic faith. He must rectify the failures of his predecessor and treat this epidemic of hate, that has targeted over 100 churches across Canada, with the urgency that it deserves. So there are a lot of churches burning, and we hear endlessly about anti-Semitism and Islamophobia, and we hear very little about the churches burning, and very little, even less, about what anybody's going to do about it. This is interesting. Francois Philippe Champagne, our finance minister, says Canada's economy grew by 2.2% in Q1, above market expectations and among the strongest in the G7. We're building Canada strong. And GM says the finance minister thinks that the economy grew 2.2% in the first quarter, not understanding that this is the annualized rate. Q1 growth was actually 0.5, the same as the last quarter in 24, and entirely due to exports to the United States, with companies trying to avoid Trump's tariffs. We're so screwed. The guy doesn't even know it. Brian Lilly's reporting that there's a trade deal imminent with Trump, and apparently it could happen before the G7. And I don't know any details. It's one of those things where I thought we had a trade deal with Trump. Are we going to get an even worse deal? Like, here's what you had, and here's the new deal for you being such prize a-holes the last little while, right? Like, oof. I hope not, but we'll see. Trump seems to like Mark Carney, although I can't figure out why. Although I saw a video of Trump saying that maybe he was going to pardon Diddy as well, and then 50 Cent, or do you say it 50 Cent? I don't know. I think the second one's more correct. Has started putting out videos of Diddy carving up Trump, like being insulting to Trump, and so I thought that's pretty funny. Like we're man, the whole world is crazy. We're watching. It's like their influencers have battles in order to build up their, on like X or whatever, or even Twitch, they have battles to build up their follower counts. And like they do it, they'll call each other behind the scenes and be like, you and I are going to have a fight. And then this way we'll increase the drama will increase our exposure. And that's, we're building followers this way. And it seems like we're watching that kind of mechanism play out between a president and Puff Daddy and 50 Cent, and like just this weird, the executive branch has been taken over by not Zoomers exactly, but this social political machine that is outside of what it is traditionally. And it's really, really strange to watch. It's not something that you would expect, that crossover of 50 Cent, Puff Daddy, Donald Trump, and the back and forth that's happening. And I find it like, it's so odd, in the mid 1990s, what kind of time, like you would go to a political magazine like Time magazine or something like that to find articles about this kind of stuff. And how do you encapsulate that in a mainstream media article, right? It's so unlikely. It's so weird. Everything is so crazy. And like, that's just one of the many, many bonkers stories like that. And like Trump is playing into it and using it to elevate his audience and his platform and the rest. Fine. That's what presidents do. But the whole thing is just, it's so weird. And all of the stuff that supposedly matters, so weird. Because the stuff that does matter is being buried under a whole bunch of nonsense. And it's all nonsense. Like, not that I don't care about Puff Daddy. The Epstein files are important and all the rest, so on and so forth. But Trump having a battle, or Trump's not even really engaging in it too much, but it's 50 Cent and Puff Daddy. But watching it all unfold, again, like, why aren't they focusing on the important things? Why are they distracting us with this bullshit? So I don't know. I'd like to cut through the noise, please. The difference between the signal and the noise, and it's all just noise. A lot of it is noise. Blacklock's reporter is reporting, this is our election stuff, and then I'll kill the stream. Although I noticed that I am not streaming. So I had some meetings this morning, and I decided that I wasn't going to stream. And so that was just me acting out what I normally do. Blacklock's reporter says, demands grow for Elections Canada oversight after Chief Electoral Officer fails to explain random poll closures in one riding and irregularities in others. It needs scrutiny. Yeah, well, the election was rigged, and Brittany says there was a frozen pipe and they had no water for weeks. But I think that there are many instances of irregularities, and they're not in small Inuit towns that don't have water. So it's an interesting situation, what's going on with our elections. And I don't think we're going to get any kind of satisfaction. I don't think we're going to be satisfied by any investigations any more than we've been satisfied by the Hogue report or the various commissions and things that are, supposed to get to the bottom of the Freedom Convoy and things like that. All of it has been politically cracked and lies, basically. So it's pretty interesting. We're not going to get to the end of it or the bottom of it because there's a vested interest in keeping the overarching lie going. Craig says for 9 of the last 11 quarters, the GDP per capita has fallen in Australia. This is the worst economic performance in Australian history. We have bumbling clowns dictating policy in Canberra that are speeding us backwards, and yet somehow they were re-elected with a massive increased majority. What will it take for Australians to wake up? People admitting that the elections are rigged. People admitting that this doesn't usually happen when people in the leadership class are wholesale stealing from you and facilitating an invasion. This only happens when you're not in control of your government anymore. And that's happening across the West. I don't believe that our elections are above board. And so show me evidence that they are, and I'll show you concerning irregularities en masse. Concerned citizen or concerned Canadian says, this is what so many of us have been openly saying. Elections Canada has lost control of the process, and resultantly, there is now a huge lack of trust and declining credibility. Fair elections must be the cornerstone of our democracy. It isn't now. Right. And so CBC News Politics is reporting conservative fundraiser casts doubt on whether all votes were accurate and counted in leaked call. Caller claims media liberals seek to scrutinize the result of confirmed recounts. So yeah, it's everybody's talking about it, but the brass aren't. A lot of people really liked Matt Strauss's speech, and I liked it too. Where's that messaging from the Conservative Party? Why isn't that done before the election? Why didn't we hear that on repeat before the election from the Conservatives, from Matt Strauss? Put him front and center saying all of those things before the election, because, you know, it's all well and good that he put it together. Maybe he did say it and nobody listened, but that's our media's fault. And so it's interesting. I didn't see it. If he was saying it, if that was part of his stump speech, why didn't Polyev put him front and center and have him warm up the crowd? Like, it doesn't, not that it doesn't make sense, but a weak conservative party or a compromised conservative party hides their best talent, right? So I don't know, man. The whole thing is very, very suspect, and people are questioning it. But again, not the brass, and the people who are in charge and could have started questioning it are absent. And that's very, very concerning. This is very interesting too. Okay, we'll put this on the free show and then we'll go. This guy, the United Nations wants to do away with free speech on X and everywhere else. So here is this United Nation guy. This is Antonio Gutierrez. And I believe this is recent, the last 2 days. But here we go. He's going after X. He wants to end free speech online.
Digital platforms are being misused to subvert science and spread disinformation and hate to billions of people. This clear and present global threat demands clear and coordinated global action. Our policy brief on information integrity on digital platforms puts forward a framework for a concerned international response.
Honestly, it seems like one of those Simpsons things. Like, I'm Troy McClure. You may remember me from such UN atrocities as, here's our new pamphlet. So your country's being invaded. I mean, honestly, it's insane. And when he pulls up the pamphlet, right, like, whoop, it seems kind of funny. Okay, so they're going after our internet, and it's way worse than you think. And if I were streaming, I would stop the stream now. So that's 41 minutes, and we'll carry on for everybody else. There's more news here. Hello everyone, thanks very much for watching. This is just a short version of a longer show. If you'd like to get the whole show, you can go over to CanadaPoly.com and sign up for a subscription. Just look in the drop-down tab for Shop and Donate and look for subscriptions, and you'll get immediate access to the full show. Love to see you. Thanks for watching, everybody. Have a wonderful, wonderful day.